Today is Mother's Day, and I thought I would take that a bit as my theme. We'll see what happens, but that was my intention. The other morning I was giving a webinar, the other evening, based on Master's book, The Essence of Self-Realization. And the chapter that we were working on is One God, One Religion. And I was commenting in the course of that about how the word God is a very unfortunate and not all that particularly useful word in English, because it doesn't really have any specific meaning, and it doesn't in and of itself conjure up any experience. It's just a word. And when people have a concept of God, when they've only heard English and like that, it's almost always based on either philosophy or religious dogma. Whoa, excuse me. Or religious dogma. You sort of get the Baptist God, the Jewish God, the Catholic God, whatever it might be. When we advertise our meditation classes, sometimes they seem to stand alone from Sunday service and other aspects of what we do. So people will come in because they've heard that meditation is good for them, that it'll help their physical health, it'll make them less tense at work, less annoyed with their spouse and their children, whatever it might be. So they'll come in entirely for that reason and then discover that they've gotten involved in something that has a spiritual component. And many times such people will assert, I don't believe in God. They'll either be atheist or agnostic, but they'll have this strong feeling against God. Then you ask them what they're against. And generally speaking, what they're against is well worth opposing. Just some very narrow, often sectarian, often completely inconsistent point of view in which you can't help but think no thinking person, many thinking people would reject such a concept. And I usually say, well, if that was my concept of God, I would be an atheist too. So why don't we just start over on this? And in that context, I mentioned that the Sanskrit language, which we try not to resort to randomly just because it's confusing, is a much better language for talking about spiritual things. Because the words for God, of which there are hundreds, which cause the West to look at them kind of in a sneering way, like, can't you people make up your mind? Swamiji himself said when he heard Master interpreting the Bhagavad Gita, as Swamiji put it, Swamiji said he'd been trained in the West where something meant something, and if it meant this, it didn't mean that. It was always just either or. And in the Indian side, it's like there's one verse of scripture and they have actual contests to see how many different possible interpretations you can find in that. And so we saw Master saying that this verse meant this, and on the other hand it means this, and then from another point of view it means that. Swamiji describes this as actually a period of serious spiritual testing for him, and he kept thinking, can't he make up his mind onto what this really means? But what they are working with is not something outside of ourselves that just sort of sits up there and is totally fixed. The traditional Michelangelo kind of God who's just there, and we walk up to him and we hope that he'll be in a good mood and give us what we want, or we try to hide. But the Eastern concept, which is what Master brought to us, of self-realization, is this flowing reality that is experienced. It's not contemplated abstractly. It's something living that is always part of us. And once you go into that, and once you go into the idea that this is a personal relationship, you can see that there's going to be as many forms of God as there are people to experience Him. I mean, just any two people sitting together. Last night we had a wonderful party in here. That's what for those of you who are new, that's what all the things in the back are. That's not usually like that. The whole room was lavishly decorated. There was this long, on both sides, long array of food that people had brought. And I, among others, went very carefully, looked at everything, contemplated each one, and then chose the ones that suited me. And I chose different things than other people chose, and looking at everyone's plate in something so simple as just what the palate wants, what the tummy wants, or sometimes what the tummy doesn't want, but the palate wants, whatever it might be. Everybody's just moving in their own reality because we are just a field of vibrations, and those vibrations have to match. We don't take anything into us, and we can't relate to anything. In fact, we don't even know it's there unless it actually matches. My father, who had a policy of being open-minded, when he came to visit, when I was living at Ananda Village, they only came a couple of times. And at that time I lived up at the seclusion retreat, and there was a meditation at noon in the temple, and my father asked if he could go in and watch. I told him, sure, there's not a lot to see. And he did indeed. He went and sat in the back and he watched. And he observed how people had different ways of sitting and just all the things, because he had a very Virgo mind, and that was how he related to it. So that was his experience of meditation. It was a spectator sport of some kind. But he was in the temple, and he was in front of the masters. And step by step, this is how we do it. In the Bhagavad Gita, it even talks about the progression of spiritual teaching, how you come to accept it. And it says, the first time you hear it spoken of, you don't even know that it was spoken. You don't even know. Another time when you hear it spoken, and then you immediately fall asleep. Which I think is just such a marvelous thing. Not for me. I'm really not here. And then it makes no impact, and then you find it intriguing, and step by step, until we find ourselves here. Well, after that discussion in the webinar that I was describing, one of the women who was there with us was talking about her 3.5-year-old grandson. And she was intrigued by the idea of explaining God, because she would really like to talk to him about God. And she wasn't sure how she's going to answer this. And I said, well, why don't you ask him if he loves his mother and if he loves his grandma? And we have to stop and ask this question of ourselves: where does that love come from? What is it that we're expressing? We just have those experiences, but where do those experiences come from? Because of the fabulous nature of the internet these days, one can just see all kinds of things that you would never have seen. And it came across my view, this amazing little bit of film where a surgeon was operating in utero on like a 6-month-old baby that had that thing where the spine doesn't quite come together. So they opened up the mother and they made it together, and then closed the mother up and left the baby in so he would grow normally. So in the middle of this surgery, this tiny little arm comes out of the womb, and then it takes a hold of the surgeon's finger. And there was a photographer filming the surgery, because the surgery was such a medical marvel. You can look it up. Go Google it. Don't Google it now, even if you have your phone with you. Okay. But I watched it repeatedly, because this bloody scene where they've got the mother's belly cut open, the little hand comes out, just grabs like that. Where does that come from? Where does the life come from? Where does the desire to reach out and connect come from? I don't know Sanskrit enough to know, but I bet there's a Sanskrit word for it. There's certainly a word for that infinite current of love which has nothing to do with who's expressing it. That word is prem. We think of love. I love you, and I probably love you because, after all, you love me. And when you stop loving me, then I very neatly stop loving you. And this is the great misery-producing reality of our human existence, is that we're always keeping score and trading back and forth. But no matter how often we get disappointed, no matter how often the score doesn't come out right, there's something in us that we have no control over, that is so much bigger than we are, that we are an aspect of it. We are not in control of it. This just irresistible desire. I recently visited a friend who's incarcerated in prison. He's been in prison for a long time. I visited him in the heart of Folsom, and now I'm visiting him in a facility where there's more freedom there. But especially when it's fulsome, I mean, it's very spiritually stimulating to step into environments that are completely other than your own, especially from the point of view that we live, where we live with this belief in the evolution of the soul and reincarnation and the karmic experiences that we all have to go through. And even though we are intensely identified with the reality that we're living now, we were equally intensely identified with whatever reality we were living then and whatever reality we may be living in the future. This is one of those little tricks that God plays on us, is that what we're doing we think is everything. So you go into that prison and it's because the security was so great. Everything is an airlock. You step through one facility, you stand there, it closes behind you before the next one opens, and it's just a long, long process. And you finally get into the center of this, and you're in, kind of an ugly multi-purpose room, like from junior high, and perfectly regular-looking people are all just sitting around with their mothers and fathers and boyfriends and girlfriends. Well, it's all men, so it's only their girlfriends, and their children and all of that. And I would just sit there and think, every single one of these men has a mother, and many of those mothers were sitting there. And there was an irresistible need to love. And I wasn't going around interviewing, why are you here? And why are you here? Everybody in jail everybody in prison is innocent anyway, so there's no point in asking. Right. But why are you here? And it didn't really make any difference. You're just people are looking out from the same reality is looking out. And the mother's heart, or the sister, or the sweetheart, or the child, whatever it is, it's this flow of energy just back and forth that we are so not in charge of. We are so not the creator of. It's so obvious if you stop and think of it. Where does it come from? And why is it always there? It's just always there. A parent, a child, you can't give up on it. Even if you don't like the people, you still can't give up on it, no matter what they've done, because it is the fundamental reality. That interrelationship, that desire to comfort, that tiny little hand coming out of the bloody womb to grasp the surgeon's hand, and you look at that picture and you can't help but think that the baby is saying, excuse me, thank you. Because what the doctor was doing was going to make that whole incarnation different. Thank you for going to school and learning how to do this and saving me now and then. Tucked the little hand back in. Closed it up before it could come out again. Right? We're so not in charge of this. And when everything is finished, when we come to calmness, I'm not talking about death, when all the chaos of the distractions of life are ending. Just a moment, I lost the thought. We all come back to that same reality, and everyone shares it. I want to be connected. I want to be loved. I want to have an opportunity to give. What makes people the most unhappy is that loneliness. When people often talk about, oh, you travel in India, I was asked this recently somewhere, oh, you travel in India, the poverty there must be so difficult to deal with. And I just thought, no, actually it isn't. Every soul has to struggle in one way or another. Because America values money above everything else, our idea of the worst possible kind of suffering is not to have money. We just can't conceive of anything worse. One of my dear Indian friends who was very westernized, we asked him once, you're so good at what you do, have you ever thought of moving to America? Oh no, he said. And then he said it like this, you Americans are never satisfied. No matter how much you have, you always want more. He said, I wouldn't live in your country for anything, just to live in that atmosphere. So for us, it's like the greatest poverty is not to have stuff. We see, Indian people with one change of clothes or not even that, and that's the worst that we can possibly think of. Well, Mother Teresa came to America, and she may have successfully set up a mission here and there. She was utterly thwarted in San Francisco. She basically shook the dust of San Francisco off her sandaled feet and went back to India because she couldn't get I don't know if you all remember this. It was a number of years ago. Mother Teresa was trying to establish a missionary of charities in San Francisco, and they had a house and everything, but they ripped the carpets out and they wanted to turn the hot water off. And it was a multi-storied house, and she didn't want to install an elevator. And how will you get the sick and poor people up and down the stairs? Mother Teresa said, the nuns will carry them. And why don't you want the hot water? She says, we don't need the hot water. And city wouldn't let her do it. Just everything that she wanted to do to reduce it all down to the nuns' capacity to love the people. Absolutely not. You had to have all this stuff in between. And she finally just went like this. I mean, it's not a good thing that she did that either. But then she said afterwards, she said, the poverty of India is nothing compared to the poverty of this country. She said, there it's the poverty of the body, here it's the poverty of the heart. The inability to love. The inability even to allow ourselves to do it, the fear of expressing it, the isolation that our passion for stuff gives us. I mean, starting with the fact that everybody can afford their own car and their own house and their own washing machine and their own lawnmower, and everything. I read in the paper about somebody caught in the economic downturn, and 3 generations of a family were living in a small house. And yes, they said at times it was challenging that the dining room was also the bedroom. But on the other hand, they were finding a richness in the experience that they never had when they were all able just to cocoon themselves in the American personal space like this. Now, Master came to change that. He came to change it by starting with cooperative communities. But he also came to change it in a much more profound way, because the Western idea of God has been formed by Jesus talking about God the Father. And the reason Jesus talked about God the Father is because he was correcting the Jews, and to them God was the judge, and that was really scary. So he tried to teach them that God was not the judge, he was the Father. And Jesus said, if you ask of your Father a loaf of bread, will he give you a stone? He was trying to get them to understand that God was their friend and he was on their side, and that which belongs to the Father is inherited by the Son. But still, and I'm not talking about men and women, the masculine sets the standard and is still that somewhat impersonal. Mommy says, wait till your father comes home. That's what it is. You can push me around, but wait till your father comes home. And that's the picture you have. Even though the father belongs to you, you still have to rise to that. But Master says the mother is completely different. The mother's heart is always there, and nothing can separate the mother and the child. And Master has these delightful prayers where he teaches us how to pray to Divine Mother. You crawl into the lap of Divine Mother and you say, I know I've done things wrong, and I know that the karmic law has to be met, but Mother, you could intercede for me and it wouldn't have to happen. I'm your naughty baby, and I'm just going to cling here, and you're not going to be able to turn me away. And so Master came with that thought, with that reality, with that expression, with that personification in his own person, with that marvelously androgynous face where you can't really tell. There were times in Master's life where there was a child, he was having dinner with a family, and this child was at the table with him and kept staring at him all night, and finally got up from his seat and came over and stood really close to Master, put his face right close to his and said, are you a man or are you a woman? And Master said, neither. Just like that. It was like when a child was looking at Swamiji in his 80s, and the child could tell from looking at him that he was old, but from feeling him, his energy, that he wasn't. She did the same thing. She just stared really hard at his face. How old are you anyway? She just couldn't tell. And he answered, when you were an old woman, I was a little boy. She looked at him like that for a minute, and then she sort of got it and walked away. Neither. But what Master brought to us, you see, was the experience of God being as close to us as our own mother. You know, we as physical beings, every one of us, as Mother sweetly put it, grew under their heart. Just we're right there, literally came from their bodies. And they sacrificed their bodies for us. They made us of their own selves, held us, lived for us in that way. And that is what God is to us. He's that close. Master talks in his marvelous confusion of genders. Worship God as mother. He can't refuse you when you do. Because all of this is everything. And what we're looking for, and what we're always looking for, is not some final definition of what this is and what it means. We're not wanting to just sit alone in our rooms and make lists of the characteristics of the divine. What we really want is to be comforted. In the Bible, that's how Jesus managed to put the point across. He said, after I'm gone, I will send you the Comforter. That word is so exquisite, isn't it, in English? That's the best word I think we have in English for God. It's much better than God. The Comforter. Just think about that. When things become so difficult, which they often do, what is it that we long for? We long to be comforted. We don't really want to be instructed. We don't want to be reminded that once again we have failed to meet the standard, that once again all our intentions have crashed, that once again all our expectations are not going to be fulfilled, or even if everything's been going wonderfully, we realize that nothing lasts in this world. That even if we have a really good run, and we've been having a really good run, this has been a great incarnation, regardless of the individual circumstances, because we are so close to the Masters. We've been given the sacred keys of awakening. That's what it says in our Festival of Light. Into our hands have been given the sacred keys of awakening. And then there's a marvelous line, abundant now is our hope. I mean, think about that. Think what it means to have an abundance of hope. That's the Comforter. Because that's what comfort finally is, isn't it? Oh yes, I know, my dear, that you are absolutely miserable now. And indeed, this is quite a mess. I was talking to someone once, she came to me for counseling, and everything in that woman's life was disintegrating. And I mean, what could I say? The tale of woe was really impressive. And I said, well, the good news is that you get to start over from scratch. Nothing that you had is left. This is 100%er. Her first response to that was a look of horror. But she could somehow feel the way I meant it. Instead of resisting everything, let's just say, this is what's happened to us. We get to start over from scratch. And God is our comforter. God is our mother, climbing into that lap to be comforted. And if we haven't been held in that way by a physical mother, if you have been held, you can remember it. If you haven't been held, you know by contrast what you didn't have and what you now long for. Isn't it so? Master says, make that relationship the most intimate relationship you can possibly have. That's what God is to us. Churches really are just places where we come to celebrate it. It's not created by anyone. It can't be created by anyone. Just as your own relationship to your mother and your mother's relationship to you as the child, absolutely intimate. It's impossible for anyone else to be in that relationship. It just can't be there. And that doesn't begin to describe how close we are with the divine and how committed and constant, infinite, and ever blissful that relationship can be. And it's always there. And the only limiting factor is our willingness to embrace it. God bless you.